Okay, let's dive in. Picture this. A quiet college town. Like really quiet, people don't lock their cars, that kind of place.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this student house right near campus. And boom, overnight, just shattered by this crime.
Yeah.
So brutal, so shocking. It grabbed everyone's attention everywhere.
Yeah, that's exactly the scene the sources paint for us today. We've got a good amount of material here, focused really tightly on those first few days of the Idaho Murders case.
Right.
And our mission here for this deep dive is basically to cut through all the noise, all the speculation that was just everywhere, you know?
Yeah, there was so much.
And just build your understanding based purely on what these specific sources tell us happened.
Exactly. We want to pull out the timelines, the raw facts as presented here, the big challenges the investigators were up against.
Right.
And really importantly, what the sources say was going on behind the scenes, the stuff that wasn't immediately public knowledge.
Right.
So by the end, you should have a really clear sourced view of those critical first hours and days.
Yeah, this material really lets us see the sequence of events, you know, leading up to the discovery and the huge challenges, maybe unexpected ones, facing the police in this, like, pretty small town.
Yes, sir.
And those absolutely vital clues that, according to this material, they were already working on while, you know, the public was understandably confused and demanding answers.
Okay, so let's go back. The night before, November 13th, 2022, the sources kind of lay out a typical Saturday night, right?
Mm-hmm.
For college kids.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You've got Ethan, he was with his sister earlier, then joined Zana at a Sigma Chi fraternity party.
Okay.
And the sources also highlight Maddie and Kaylee being downtown. They were at the Corner Club bar.
Right, and this is where Kaylee's ex-boyfriend, Jack, comes into the picture. The sources mention that.
They do, yeah. They met up there, giving a little context maybe for those phone calls made later that the sources say went unanswered.
Okay, so after the bar, Maddie and Kaylee, where do they go?
The sources track them to the grub truck. You know, the late-night food truck spot.
Ah, okay. Classic.
Yeah. And eventually, they got a ride home, arrived back at the King Road house probably around 1:45, 2 a.m., pretty much the same time Xana and Ethan got back.
So everyone's back around the same time. What happens then, according to the sources?
Well, the material suggests they were maybe all awake for a bit, interacting before heading off to bed. Kaylee and Maddie went up to Maddie's room, 3rd floor.
And Kaylee's dog.
Murphy, yeah. The sources mention he stayed in Kaylee's room, which was across the hall. Xana and Ethan were in Xana's room, 2nd floor.
And the roommate who survived, Dylan.
She was also on the 2nd floor in her own room down the hall.
Right. And Bethany, the other survivor.
Downstairs, basement level room, so everyone's kind of accounted for in their spots.
And the last, confirmed contact with the outside world.
That seems to be Xana ordering DoorDash. The sources put that around 4 a.m.
4 in the morning. Wow.
Yeah, that 4 a.m. order is basically the last known point in time, according to these sources, where we know they were alive and doing something normal.
Yeah.
After that, silence.
And that silence, it stretches for, about 8 hours?
Roughly, yeah. Because the sources say the discovery wasn't until around noon the next day, Sunday.
And the first call to 911 was immediately reported as murders, wasn't it?
No, interestingly, the sources state the initial call came in as an unresponsive individual. So not the full picture right away.
But when the police got there.
Oh, the material describes just unimaginable horror. The affidavit details, it's quoted in the sources, the severity of the injuries, carnage so bad, blood was apparently visible seeping towards the outside foundation.
It's awful.
4 students stabbed with a knife. And a really critical point the sources stress, no weapon found at the scene. Not initially.
And this hits Moscow, Idaho. Like a bomb, basically.
Absolutely. The sources paint this picture of a town where, serious crime just didn't happen, safe, people leaving cars unlocked, and then this. It just shattered everything overnight. And the sources make it clear this wasn't just local news. It went, and I'm quoting here, right around the world almost overnight. Wow. Media just descended on the town. It went from this quiet college spot to the absolute center of this huge global story. The community felt under siege, is how the sources put it. Not just by the crime, but the intense media storm.
And the sources also mention the victims themselves, their lives playing out on social media.
Yeah, their pictures, their vibrant smiles, their, beauty. The sources suggest this public visibility probably fueled that intense global interest even more.
And you start seeing the families sharing things. The sources include some really touching descriptions.
They do. Xana described as tough, funny, someone who couldn't make you smile. Maddie, bright, fun, had such a bright future.
Nathan, the family comedian, just loved life.
Yeah, just love life, exactly. And Kaylee, very likable, didn't have her mean bone in her body, raised not to be self-centered. Those details, they really ground the tragedy in the sources, remind you of the people lost.
So as all this is sinking in, the human cost. The investigation itself is just exploding in scale.
Oh, massively. The sources make that clear. You're dealing with a quadruple homicide. That means multiple autopsies, incredibly detailed scene processing, combing the neighborhood for cameras, dumping cell tower data. It just got bigger and bigger, as the material says.
And that presents a huge challenge for the Moscow police. The sources mentioned they're a pretty small department.
Yeah, relatively small. Just over 30 officers, the sources say. And suddenly they're leading this massive, complex case.
Which led to criticism.
Immediately, yeah. The sources talk about the internet backlash, people online calling them incompetent, comparing them to Mayberry RFD or Barney Fumbling, questioning if they had the labs, the forensics expertise for something this big.
But the police response, according to the sources,
They didn't hesitate to bring in help. State police, FBI, they were involved very quickly. But, and this is crucial in the sources, Chief Fry was very clear, Moscow PD was in charge.
right.
The quote mentioned is, "This is a Moscow Police Department investigation. We pick the investigators." So accepting help, yes, but maintaining lead control.
And another layer of difficulty the sources point out was the house itself.
Yeah, the King Road House, described as a party house. Lots of people coming and going, parties sometimes even when the residents weren't home.
That means
A huge pool of people to talk to, right? Anyone who'd been there might have left DNA, might know something. It complicates things immensely.
yeah, I can see that.
And the sources mention this possibility that maybe neighbors heard something that night but just thought, oh, just another party over there. Dismissed it. That whole environment made the investigation trickier.
And while all this is happening internally,
Yeah.
externally, the police communication, pretty tight-lipped.
Very. The sources describe them as very, very tight-lipped in those first days, basically saying nothing publicly.
Which must have been frustrating for people wanting answers.
Oh, absolutely. And it fueled speculation, for sure. But the sources explain it was a deliberate strategy. They needed to protect crucial information they had, keep the integrity of the investigation intact, even if it meant taking heat publicly.
Okay, so shifting gears slightly, the sources also talk about this whole online phenomenon that sprung up.
Yes, the rise of these online communities. The sources specifically mention the Idaho Murders case discussion group on Facebook, started by Christine Cameron and Alina Smith.
And the sources say they became pretty significant figures online.
Yeah, described as two people who, if you have been following this case, you cannot ignore. It really highlights that whole armchair sleuth explosion.
Why do you think that happened so intensely with this case?
Well, the sources suggest social media lets people see in real time what is happening, and it creates this urge to be a part of it, to try and solve it themselves.
And that Facebook group grew fast.
Astonishingly fast. The sources mentioned the admins thought 6,000 members was good for their other pages. This one hit almost 17,000 in one day.
Wow.
Eventually got up to around 227,000 members, became a full-time job for them. But an important detail the sources note, they didn't monetize it, didn't want to benefit off of a crime.
Okay, so while all that's happening online, with the public speculating, the police, according to the sources, are holding some major cards close to their chest.
Exactly. Really significant hidden information. One absolutely critical piece was the eyewitness account from one of the surviving roommates, Dylan.
And this account was key for investigators.
Hugely key, according to the sources. It helped them piece together the killer's movements inside the house.
What did it reveal?
The material says the suspect came in through sliding glass doors on the main floor, went upstairs to the third floor. The sources suggest the likely target was one of the girls upstairs.
And the weapon, the sources mention that.
They do. A KBAR knife, described vividly in the sources as one step away from a samurai sword, a crazy weapon, suggesting, he came prepared for a fight.
Okay.
He entered Kaylee and Maddie's room, and the attack there, the sources say, only took a few moments.
And this is where Dylan's perspective, her account detail in the sources, becomes so crucial. She's on the second floor.
Right. In her room, she hears noises from upstairs. The sources say she opened her door once, didn't see anything, even texted housemates maybe to keep it down, hoping to sleep.
Then she hears more.
Yeah, more commotion, yelling, the dog barking. So she gets up again, goes to her door, looks out again.
And she sees him.
She sees him. A dark figure of a man dressed all in black, wearing a mask. But the sources highlight specific details she noticed. All she can see are his eyes and his bushy eyebrows, which really stand out to her.
Wow. And he just walked past her.
According to the material, yeah. Walked right past her without saying anything and then out the back of the house.
And the whole thing, entry to exit, was quick.
About 15 minutes, the sources estimate. Happening around 4:15 a.m.
And Xana and Ethan. What did the sources suggest happened there?
The material indicates their final moments were caught up in this. They'd just gotten their DoorDash. Maybe they encountered the killer coming down the stairs. The sources mention a struggle outside Xana's room. Ethan was mortally wounded. Xana fought back hard, but the sources state tragically they couldn't save each other.
So, okay, that eyewitness account is huge. But it brings us back to that big question everyone had early on. The 8-hour delay. Why didn't Dylan call the police until noon, hours after seeing the killer?
Right, that was a major point of confusion. The affidavit, which the sources, quote, extensively gives the explanation, Dylan enters into a frozen shock phase.
Frozen shock.
Yeah, the sources really emphasize this.
Yeah.
Think about it. You're 19, you see a masked man in black in your house after hearing commotion upstairs. It's terrifying.
Absolutely.
The sources explain it as being paralyzed with fear. Self-preservation becomes the #1 priority. One source explicitly says, it does not surprise me at all that she locked her door and was frozen with fear and that there was such a delayed response.
So that explanation, coming later in the affidavit, provides that crucial context the public was missing initially.
Exactly. It helps make sense of something that seemed inexplicable at first glance.
Okay, so the eyewitness account was one huge piece of hidden info. What was the other major one the sources highlight?
The other was critical physical evidence, found right at the scene.
What was it?
The sources reveal that the very first officer on scene noticed a knife sheath lying near Kaylee and Maddie.
A knife sheath. Any
Huh?
details about it?
Yes, the sources state it had a U.S. Marine Corps logo on it. The EGA, Eagle, Globe, and Anchor.
And the significance of finding that? Huge, presumably.
Immense. Investigators secured it immediately, obviously. The sources explain it's a potential gold mine for forensics. Fingerprints, maybe hair, blood, and especially DNA.
Like touch DNA.
Exactly. Skin cells, sweat, often a very small amount, as the sources note. The crime lab's job would be to try and extract that DNA, and if they could get enough, create an STR profile, a unique genetic fingerprint.
And getting a profile from that sheath, the sources describe that as
A significant development, even called a huge nuclear bomb in this investigation. That single item, that sheath, held the potential to break the case wide open.
Right. So looking back at everything we've unpacked from these sources, we've traced the victim's last known moments, the absolute chaos of the discovery, the immense pressure on the small police force, the sort of parallel universe of online speculation, and then these incredibly vital pieces the police had, but kept secret. Dylan's eyewitness account mapping the killer's path.
Right, seeing him walk right past her.
And maybe most crucially, that DNA evidence from the knife sheath found right there at the scene.
Yeah, these specific points pulled right from the source material we looked at, they paint a much fuller, much more complex picture than what people knew initially.
Briefly.
You see the investigators navigating these incredible difficulties, a really messy scene, tons of potential contacts, intense public pressure, while simultaneously, quietly pursuing these critical forensic leads. It really underscores the power of those key pieces of evidence the sources reveal were kept under wraps.
So understanding these specific details from the sources, it really gives you, the listener, much deeper insight into those chaotic early stages.
And maybe here's something to think about. Consider how differently everyone perceived the investigation at first based on really limited, sometimes confusing information, versus the reality we see in the sources, where police were working with this incredibly powerful hidden evidence. Think about that contrast, the huge public focus on, say, the 8-hour delay before the 911 call, versus the quiet, meticulous work happening in the lab on that one item, the knife sheath, and the story the DNA on it might tell.